The day he filed for divorce, he walked into the courtroom hand in hand with his mistress and said, "She's old, crazy and broke. I'm taking everything." The lawyers laughed. My kids looked away, but I spent months gathering his hidden emails, forged papers and secret accounts. When I presented them to the judge, he lost the house, the money and the children, and I won back everything he tried to steal. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The end came on a Tuesday, in the library, a room that was more a museum of my life than a simple collection of books. 30 years of my career as an antiques dealer and appraiser were on display, a rare first edition of The Great Gatsby on the mantelpiece, a Louis XV writing desk in the corner, and shelves filled with volumes on art history, their spines a testament to a life spent in pursuit of objects with a story. My husband Robert stood by the fireplace, a glass of expensive single malt scotch in his hand. At 60 he was still a strikingly handsome man, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit impeccably tailored. He had the easy, confident charm of a man who had glided through life on a current of good looks and other people's money. Mostly mine. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the picture of a man about to deliver a difficult but necessary quarterly report. "Vivian," he began, his voice smooth and devoid of any emotion, "this isn't working anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. I've filed for divorce." I was sitting in my favorite reading chair, a worn leather wingback I had lovingly restored myself. I didn't say anything, I simply watched him. This man I had known for more than half my life, and felt a strange, cold detachment. The announcement was not a shock. The shock was the utter lack of feeling with which he delivered it. It was a business transaction. He was divesting. "I've retained counsel," he continued, taking a sip of his scotch. "Arthur Vance. Top man in the city. He'll be in touch with whomever you decide to hire. I want this to be amicable. Of course. Clean. For the sake of the children." The children. Our children, Marcus and Jenna, were 28 and 25. They were adults living their own lives, lives that were, I now realized with a sickening clarity, heavily subsidized by the family wealth he was so calmly preparing to carve up. "There is another woman, I assume," I said, my voice a quiet, flat statement of fact. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "That's not relevant to the legal proceedings. Vivian, the point is, I'm moving on. I suggest you do the same." He drained his glass and set it down on a priceless 18th century side table without a coaster, an act of casual disrespect that was in its own way as cruel as his words. He turned to leave the room, his part in this drama complete. "My lawyers will handle the unpleasant details of the separation," he said over his shoulder, and with that he walked out, leaving me alone in the silent, beautiful room that was, I now understood, no longer a home, but merely an asset to be liquidated. In the weeks that followed, Robert did not just leave our marriage. He launched a scorched earth campaign against my character. I began to hear whispers, secondhand reports from friends who would call, their voices full of a confused, pitying concern. Robert was telling people that the divorce was a tragedy. Yes, but a necessary one, brought on by my own sad mental decline. He was a master storyteller, and he wove a compelling and deeply insidious narrative. To our friends at the country club he spoke of my erratic behavior, my passion for antiques, my willingness to spend a significant sum on a rare piece I knew was a good investment, was twisted into a tale of fiscal irresponsibility, of a woman who was frittering away their retirement savings on old junk. He told them I was becoming reclusive and paranoid. The truth that I was heartbroken and had no desire to socialize with the very people he was so successfully turning against me, was reframed as a symptom of my instability. He was not just divorcing me, he was diagnosing me. The most painful part was how he poisoned the children. I heard it from my own son Marcus. I had called him, desperate for some connection, some familial support. His voice was distant, cautious. "Mom, Dad told me about what happened," he said, his tone that of a parent speaking to a difficult child. "He's really worried about you," he said. "You've been spending a lot, that you're not really yourself these days." "Your father is leaving me for another woman, Marcus," I said, my voice trembling with a hurt so profound it was almost physical. "That is what happened. I know it's hard, Mom," he said, his voice full of a practiced, patronizing sympathy. "But Dad says you've been mismanaging your finances. He's just trying to protect the family assets. For all of us." "The family assets," I had built my business from a small stall in an antique market into one of the most respected appraisal firms in the country. The assets were not family assets. They were my assets. But Robert had spent 30 years blurring that line, and now he was erasing it completely. He was not just leaving me, he was rewriting our entire 30-year history. He was casting himself as the responsible, long-suffering husband, finally forced to take action to protect his family from his unstable, incompetent wife. He was building a case not just for divorce but for my complete and utter disenfranchisement. And he was doing it with the skill and charm of the master salesman he had always been. The true depth of my isolation became clear a week later. I had invited Marcus and my daughter Jenna to the house for dinner. I had hoped that away from their father's immediate influence, I could talk to them, could make them see the truth. They arrived together, a united front of youthful unease. They walked into the house, their own childhood home, with the cautious air of visitors entering a hospital room. We sat in the formal dining room, the three of us, the silence between us as heavy and oppressive as the antique mahogany table. I had cooked their favorite meal, a simple roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes, a taste of a happier, simpler time. They barely touched it. "I need you to understand what's happening," I began, my voice pleading. "Your father is not just leaving me. He is trying to take everything. He is telling people I am unwell, that I am incompetent. It's not true. You know it's not true." Marcus looked down at his plate, meticulously cutting his single bite of chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. Jenna just stared at the centerpiece, a beautiful arrangement of hydrangeas from the garden. "Mom," Marcus finally said, his voice low, his eyes still fixed on his plate. "Dad's lawyer says this is a pretty standard procedure. He's just trying to get a fair settlement. Maybe you should just try to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I repeated, my voice rising with a note of incredulous disbelief. "He is telling our friends that I am crazy. He is trying to have me declared incompetent. And you want me to be reasonable?" Jenna finally spoke, her voice a small timid whisper. "We just don't want to get in the middle of this, Mom. It's between you and Dad. We don't want to take sides." But they had already taken a side. Their neutrality was a choice, a passive endorsement of their father's narrative. They had grown up in the glow of his charismatic personality, their lives cushioned by the wealth I had generated but which he had so masterfully distributed. They were still financially entangled with him, their car payments, their apartment rents, all quietly subsidized by the very accounts he was now trying to seize. Their loyalty had been bought and paid for. "I'm not asking you to take a side," I said, my voice now a raw, aching whisper. "I'm asking you to stand up for your mother. I'm asking you to tell the truth." Marcus finally looked at me, his face a mask of weary frustration. "And what is the truth, Mom?" "The truth is, you and Dad are getting divorced. It's ugly. It's messy. All we're asking is that you don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Just cooperate with the lawyers. Let them sort it out. That's what they're for." Cooperate. The word was a slap. Cooperate with my own execution. In that moment, I saw them for what they were. Not my children, not my allies, but a jury that had already rendered its verdict. They had chosen their father's power, his promises, his easy, charming narrative, over my difficult, painful truth. They had looked at my humiliation, at my pain, and they had chosen to look away. The betrayal was absolute, and it was the cruelest cut of all. I walked into my lawyer's office the next day feeling like a refugee, a woman without a country, cast out not just by her husband but by her own children. My lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Eleanor Vance, listened to my story of the disastrous dinner with a growing look of grim, unsurprised anger. "They are cowards, Vivian," she said when I had finished, her voice a low, furious growl. "Or worse, they are accessories, but do not let them break you. This is exactly what Robert wants. He is trying to isolate you, to make you feel so utterly alone that you simply give up." Eleanor had been my lawyer for a decade, ever since I had incorporated my business. She was a brilliant legal mind, but she was also a student of human nature, particularly its darker, more narcissistic corners. She stood up and began to pace her office, her mind clearly already at work, mapping out the battlefield. "Robert's strategy is as old as it is disgusting," she said. "It's the classic gaslight and seize maneuver. Step 1, create a false narrative of the spouse's incompetence. Step 2, get the children and friends to passively or actively support that narrative. Step 3, use that narrative in court to argue that the incompetent spouse is incapable of managing their own assets. Step 4, seize control of those assets under the guise of protecting them." She stopped and looked at me, her eyes sharp and serious. He is not just going to ask for half, Vivian. He's going to try and take everything. He's going to petition for control of your business, of your savings, of your home. He is going to try to have you placed on a managed care stipend, as if you were a child with him or a trustee of his choosing, as the administrator of your own life's work. The accuracy of her prediction was chilling. It was exactly the future my son's words had hinted at, the one I had been too afraid to contemplate. So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How do we fight something so insidious? We don't fight him on his terms, Eleanor said, a new hard glint in her eye. We don't get into a she said about your mental state. We don't try to win a public relations war with a master manipulator. We find a single irrefutable legal fact. An anchor, a piece of evidence so absolute that it makes his entire narrative, his entire case collapse like a house of cards. We need a document, Vivian, a contract, a will, a title, something that cannot be argued with. She sat back down at her desk and leaned forward, her gaze intense. So I want you to think, go back through your entire 30-year history with him. Is there anything, any asset that is so cleanly, so undeniably yours, that he cannot possibly lay a claim to it? My mind was a chaotic swirl of shared accounts, of joint investments, of a life so financially intertwined that it seemed impossible to separate one thread from another. I don't know, I said, a wave of despair washing over me. Everything is so tangled. Think. She pressed, her voice firm. Start with the big things. The house. How did you buy it? Where did the money come from? Let's start there. And as she said the word house, a faint distant memory flickered in the back of my mind. A rainy afternoon. A lawyer's office. Robert on the phone. Apologizing. A mountain of paperwork. A signature. A name I hadn't used in 30 years. It was a faint hazy memory, but it was there, and it was, perhaps, the anchor we were looking for. The memory of the closing was a ghost, a faint wispy thing that I couldn't quite grasp. Had it really happened that way? Had I really signed the papers alone? After 30 years, the lines between what had actually occurred and the shared comfortable narrative of our life had blurred into an indistinguishable haze. I had to know for sure. I spent that afternoon on a strange, tense archaeological dig through my own life. The house, my beautiful familiar home, suddenly felt like an archive, a repository of secrets I had forgotten I had kept. I started in the study, in the large mahogany filing cabinet where we kept all our important documents. I pulled open the drawer labeled property. It was filled with thick folders, insurance papers, property tax receipts, renovation contracts. I found the file for 45 Rosewood Lane. Inside was a copy of a deed, a more recent one issued by the county a decade ago after we had refinanced the mortgage. It listed both our names, Robert Sterling and Vivian Sterling, as joint tenants. My heart sank. This was what Robert's lawyer would find. This was the public record. It proved what he had been claiming all along. It was our house. But Eleanor had been specific. She had asked about the original purchase. The refinancing had happened years later. A simple transaction to secure a better interest rate. A time when adding Robert's name to the deed seemed like a natural, meaningless formality. But the original closing, that was different. I knew the original documents wouldn't be here. Robert was notoriously cavalier with paperwork. But I was the opposite. I was an appraiser, a historian of objects. I knew the value of an original document. I would have put it somewhere safe. But where? My search grew more frantic. I went through old chests in the attic, my hands dusty from years of accumulated memories. I looked through boxes in the basement, filled with the children's old school projects and forgotten toys. Nothing. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe I had remembered it all wrong. Maybe Robert had been there at the closing. Maybe my memory was just a fantasy, a desperate invention of a mind under duress. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe I was becoming forgetful, crazy. I was about to give up when my eyes fell on the antique writing desk in the corner of the library. It was a beautiful Louis XVI piece, a secretary desk I had bought at an estate auction 15 years ago. I had paid a small fortune for it, a fact that Robert had complained about for months, but I had known it was special. I ran my hand over the intricate, inlaid wood. I knew this desk had secrets. Desks of this era often had hidden compartments. I had never looked for them. I had respected its history, its integrity. But now my own history was on the line. I spent the next hour meticulously examining every inch of the desk. I pressed on panels, tapped on drawers, searched for the telltale signs of a hidden mechanism. Finally, in the back of a small deep drawer, my fingers brushed against a piece of wood that felt different. It was a false back. With a surge of adrenaline, I pried it open with a letter opener. Inside the small hidden cavity, there was not a document, there was just a small old-fashioned brass key. It was tied with a faded red ribbon to a small cardboard tag. On the tag, in my own, much younger handwriting were 3 words. First National Bank. It was a key to a safe deposit box. A box I hadn't thought about, hadn't visited, in almost 30 years. A box I had opened as a young ambitious businesswoman, long before my life had become so intertwined with Robert's. A flicker of hope, fierce and bright, ignited in my chest. Perhaps the anchor was not in this house. Perhaps it was in a bank, waiting for me. The next morning I drove to the old downtown branch of the First National Bank. A grand, imposing building with marble columns and floors that echoed with the quiet, serious business of money. The bank had changed names twice since I had last been here. But the safe deposit vault in the basement was a relic from another era, a place that time had not touched. I was led by a young, polite bank employee into a cold, sterile, brightly lit room. He used his key and I used mine, the small brass key from the secret compartment. There was a solid, satisfying clunk, and he pulled out a long, heavy metal box. "I'll leave you to it," he said, gesturing to a small, private viewing booth. I carried the box into the booth and closed the door. My heart was hammering. What would I find? Old letters? Forgotten jewelry? Or nothing at all? I lifted the heavy lid. The contents were a time capsule of a life I had almost forgotten. On top was a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon from my parents, written to me when I first moved to the city. Beneath them was my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one I had worn at my own wedding, and under the velvet jewelry box, there it was. It was a thick legal-sized envelope, slightly yellowed with age. On the front, in the same younger handwriting as the tag on the key, were 2 words: house papers. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the clasp. I pulled out the document inside. It was a sheaf of heavy watermarked paper, folded in 3. I unfolded it carefully, the old creases threatening to tear. The top of the document read, in a grand formal script, certificate of title, and below it the address, 45 Rosewood Lane. I scanned the dense legal text, my eyes searching for the one crucial piece of information, and then I found it. The section labeled, Registered Owner. My breath caught in my throat. I had remembered it all wrong, or rather, I had remembered it all right. But the crucial detail, the one that would change everything, was a detail I had completely and blessedly forgotten. The name on the deed was not Vivian Sterling. It was not Robert and Vivian Sterling. The name typed in the crisp, clear font of a 1995 electric typewriter was Vivian Dubois, my maiden name. Beneath the name, in the section for type of ownership, were 4 beautiful, devastatingly simple words: a single woman as her sole and separate property. I stared at the document, the words blurring through a sudden hot film of tears. I had been so young, so focused on my new business, that I hadn't even legally changed my name yet. The closing had happened in that small transitional window of my life, after the wedding but before the paperwork had been filed. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a secret. It was a simple chronological fact. On the day the house was purchased, the house that was the foundation of our entire 30-year life together, I was, in the eyes of the law, Vivian Dubois, a single woman, and the house, purchased with the fruits of my own labor, was mine, and mine alone. I carefully folded the document, my hands no longer shaking, and placed it back in the envelope. The ghost of a memory had just become a solid, irrefutable, and legally binding fact. I had found my anchor, and it was heavy enough to sink a battleship. I walked out of that bank feeling like a different woman. The heavy, oppressive cloak of victimhood that I had been wearing for weeks had been lifted, replaced by the cool, light armor of the truth. I didn't go home. I drove directly to Eleanor Vance's office. I walked in without an appointment, and laid the yellowed envelope on her desk. "I believe I found our anchor," I said. Eleanor, ever the professional, opened the envelope and unfolded the deed, her eyes scanning the document with a lawyer's practiced speed. She read it once, then read it again, a slow, sharp, and deeply predatory smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a hunter who has just spotted a fatal, unexpected weakness in her prey. "Vivian Dubois," she said, her voice a purr of pure, unadulterated delight. "Oh, you magnificent, beautiful, unintentional genius. This is better than an anchor. This is a torpedo. She leaned back in her chair, a low, appreciative whistle escaping her lips. This changes everything, she said. This is not just a negotiating chip. This is the whole game. This is our checkmate. So we send a copy to Robert's lawyer immediately, right? I asked, eager to land the killing blow to end this nightmare. We show him his entire case for the house is a fraud. Eleanor held up a hand, her smile turning sharp and strategic. No, she said, her voice a low conspiratorial purr. Absolutely not. We do not. I stared at her, my excitement deflating into confusion. What? Why on earth not? Because, my dear, heartbroken and soon to be fabulously vindicated friend, she said, leaning forward, her eyes shining with a warrior's glee. Your husband has just handed us the rope, and our job is not to show it to him. Our job is to let him meticulously and very publicly hang himself with it. She laid out her strategy, and it was as brilliant as it was brutal. Right now, Robert and his incompetent lawyer are operating under a single fundamental delusion that they have a legal claim to this house. It is the cornerstone of their entire case. It is the foundation of his ridiculous, insulting narrative about your instability. He is building his entire vision of his new life with this Sasha, on the assumption that he gets to keep this house. She paused, letting the strategic implications sink in. If we correct him now, he'll be humiliated, yes. But he will also recalibrate, he'll pivot, he'll adjust his demands, he'll come after your business even harder, demand more of your savings. The fight will be messy, and it will be about a dozen different things. But if we say nothing, if we let him continue to believe this fantasy, her dangerous smile returned. We let him build his entire case, his entire public narrative, his entire future around getting this house. We let him posture and preen and build his pedestal of lies as high as he possibly can. We let him walk into that courtroom and declare, in front of a judge, that he is the rightful owner of a property that has never, not for a single day, belonged to him. The cold, brutal genius of it began to dawn on me. It was a strategy of passive resistance, a legal rope-a-dope. We will fight him on every other point, she continued, but on the house we will be vague. We will be non-committal. We will simply say, the disposition of the marital home is a matter for the court to adjudicate. We will offer no correction. We will let him march his entire army onto a battlefield that, unbeknownst to him, is a legal minefield. The strategy was painful. It meant enduring more of his lies, more of the pitying looks from friends, more of my children's misguided attempts to get me to be reasonable. It meant sitting in rooms and listening to him argue about his sentimental attachment to my house. It will be hard, Vivian, Eleanor said, her voice softening, the friend re-emerging from behind the lawyer. It will require you to sit there and listen to his nonsense, to bite your tongue until it bleeds. But I promise you, when that judge reads the name Vivian Dubois aloud in open court, the look on his face will be worth every single second of the pain. I looked at her, at the fierce loyalty and brilliant strategic mind that I was so lucky to have on my side. The path she was laying out was difficult, but the destination was a pure, simple, and undeniable justice. Okay, I said, a slow, determined smile of my own beginning to form. Let him build his gallows. I have the original blueprints. The day of the final divorce hearing was a study in contrasts, a perfect, living tableau of our two separate realities. The courtroom was a grand, intimidating space, all dark wood and high ceilings, designed to make the individual feel small and the institution of law feel immense. I arrived early, with Eleanor at my side. I was a bundle of raw, jangling nerves, but I hoped I projected an aura of quiet dignity. I wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy blue dress, a single strand of pearls, and my late mother's vintage brooch. My attire was a quiet statement of my own history, my own taste, my own quiet success. I sat alone at my designated table, a solitary figure in a sea of polished wood, looking, I was sure, exactly as Robert had painted me, isolated, vulnerable, and alone. Then, he made his entrance. Robert did not simply walk into the courtroom. He took it. He strode in as if he owned the place, a conquering hero arriving for his coronation. He wore an expensive, custom-tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He was not alone. On his arm, her hand tucked possessively in the crook of his elbow, was Sasha Monroe. She was dressed not in the sober attire of a courtroom observer, but in a tight, cream-colored dress that was more appropriate for a cocktail party. Her hair was a cascade of perfect blonde waves, her makeup flawless, her smile a bright triumphant slash of red. She was not a mistress hiding in the shadows. She was a victory banner, a living, breathing trophy that Robert was parading for all the world to see. They walked down the central aisle, hand in hand, a glamorous, united front. He nodded at acquaintances in the gallery, a small, confident smile playing on his lips. He was the picture of a man who had already won, a man who had successfully traded in his old, tired life for a new, shiny and much younger model. His entrance was a deliberate, calculated act of psychological warfare, a final, public demonstration of my replacement, and his triumph. He sat at the opposing table, directly across from me. He gave Sasha's hand a reassuring squeeze, and then looked at me, his eyes full of a cool, dismissive pity. It was the look of a man who was about to put a wounded animal out of its misery. The public gallery behind us began to fill. I saw a few of our old mutual friends, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pity, and then my heart gave a painful lurching thud. My children, Marcus and Jenna, slipped into the back row, their faces pale and anxious. They had come to witness their father's victory, and their mother's final defeat. They sat with their heads bowed, refusing to meet my eyes. The room was silent. The stage was set. The audience was in place. And I, the star of this tragedy, the old crazy and broke wife, sat alone, waiting for the final humiliating act to begin. The bailiff's voice boomed. All rise, and Judge Esposito, a formidable woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for suffering no fools, swept into the room and took her place on the bench. The hearing began. Robert's lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Arthur Vance, stood to make his opening argument. He was a perfect reflection of his client, charming, verbose, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. He launched into a masterful and deeply dishonest performance. He painted a picture of a long and, for many years, happy marriage. He spoke of his client, Mr. Sterling, as a devoted husband and father, a successful wealth manager who had provided his family with a beautiful life. But then he said, his voice dropping to a tone of grave, sorrowful concern, things had begun to change. In recent years, Your Honor, Vance declared, his gaze sweeping over to me with a look of profound pity, Mrs. Sterling's behavior has become increasingly erratic. Her judgment, both personal and financial, has become unsound. There has been a pattern of reckless spending, of paranoia, of a sad but undeniable cognitive decline. He was laying it on thick, using every coded, ageist and sexist trope in the book. I sat perfectly still, my hands clasped in my lap, my face a blank, serene mask. Inside, a cold, hard rage was building, but on the outside I was a statue of calm. Vance then gestured to his client. Mr. Sterling, after much soul-searching and with a heavy heart, has made the difficult but necessary decision to end this marriage. Not out of a lack of love, but out of a need to protect the marital assets and, indeed, to protect Mrs. Sterling from herself. It was a breathtaking piece of fiction, but it was compelling. He was framing the divorce not as an abandonment, but as a painful, responsible act of financial conservatorship. Robert, playing his part to perfection, looked down at his hands, a mask of tragic, noble sorrow on his handsome face. He caught the eye of a friend in the gallery, a man from his golf club, and gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, a gesture that said, "What can you do? It's a tragedy, but I'm handling it." Then he leaned over to Sasha, who was sitting beside him, her hand resting on his thigh. He whispered something in her ear, his voice a low stage whisper that was clearly intended to be overheard by those around them, including the court reporter. "She's old, crazy, and broke," he murmured, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face. "I'm taking everything." The words, though quiet, were a sonic boom in the hushed courtroom. I saw the lawyers on his own team, 2 young associates, exchange a quick, uncomfortable look before nodding in agreement. They were on his side. They believed his story. My eyes flew to the back of the courtroom, to my children. I saw the words hit them. I saw the flicker of shame, of discomfort on their faces. This was their moment to stand up, to protest, to defend their mother from this public monstrous lie. They did nothing. Marcus stared at his hands, his knuckles white. Jenna looked away, her gaze fixing on a point on the far wall, a point anywhere but on me. Their silence was a confession. Their averted eyes were a verdict. They were complicit. The humiliation was absolute. My husband, in open court, had just declared me old, crazy, and broke. His new love sat beside him, a symbol of my replacement. His lawyers nodded in agreement. And my own children, my flesh and blood, looked away. In that moment, I had never felt so utterly and so profoundly alone. After his dramatic opening, Robert's lawyer moved on to the practicalities, the cold hard business of dividing a life. He presented the court with a meticulously detailed and wildly inflated valuation of my business, arguing that Robert was entitled to a significant share due to his strategic advisement over the years. He presented a lifestyle analysis, arguing for a substantial spousal support payment to allow Robert to maintain the standard of living to which he had become accustomed. But the centerpiece of his case, the prize upon which the entire strategy depended, was the house. Your Honor, Vance boomed, his voice resonating with a deep false sincerity. We now turn to the matter of the primary marital residence at 45 Rosewood Lane. He painted a vivid, sentimental picture of the house. He spoke of it as the heart of the family, the place where the Sterling children had grown up, the repository of 30 years of shared memories. He spoke of Robert's love for the garden, his pride in the community, his deep, emotional roots in the property. It is Mr. Sterling's deepest desire, Vance continued, to remain in the family home. To do so would provide him with a much-needed sense of stability and continuity during this profoundly difficult and emotionally turbulent transition. He then, with a masterstroke of manipulative genius, contrasted Robert's deep sentimental attachment with my supposed attachment. Mrs. Sterling, on the other hand, as her recent erratic financial behavior has demonstrated, has shown a decreasing interest in the home. Her focus has been on her business, on her acquisitions. The house for her has become little more than a place to store her collections. He was using my passion, my career, the very source of the wealth that had paid for the house, as a weapon against me, as proof that I didn't care about it. Finally, he made his formal petition to the court. Therefore, Your Honor, we petition the court to grant Mr. Sterling sole and exclusive possession of the primary marital residence. In exchange, he is, of course, willing to be more than flexible on the division of other, more liquid assets. He was making it sound like a generous trade, a difficult but fair compromise. He then delivered the final patronizing blow. We believe, he said, his voice dropping to a tone of grave concern, that it would be in Mrs. Sterling's own best interest to be relieved of the burden of maintaining such a large property. A more manageable, supervised living arrangement, funded by a managed care stipend from the marital assets, would be a far more appropriate and responsible solution, given her current state. There it was, the full ugly shape of his plan. He was not just asking for the house. He was asking for the court's permission to have me declared incompetent, to have me put out of my own home and placed on an allowance, like a child. He was asking for everything, and he was doing it under the guise of compassionate, responsible reformer. It was the most audacious, most vicious legal maneuver Eleanor Vance had ever seen, and it was playing out exactly as she had predicted. Judge Esposito listened to the entirety of Arthur Vance's long, self-serving monologue with an expression of impenetrable neutrality. Her face was a mask of professional patience, but I could see a flicker of weariness in her sharp, intelligent eyes. She had likely heard 1,000 variations of this same sad story. When Vance finally concluded his grand performance and sat down, a smug, satisfied look on his face, the judge made a note on her legal pad. She then looked up, her gaze sweeping past me and settling on my lawyer. Miss Vance, she said, her voice a dry, impatient monotone. Your response to the matter of the primary residence. This was the moment we had been planning, waiting for months. Eleanor and I had rehearsed this. She was supposed to stand up and deliver a calm, factual rebuttal, to present the evidence in a neat, orderly, lawyerly fashion. But as Eleanor began to rise, I felt a sudden, powerful and undeniable surge of conviction. This was not her fight, this was my fight. This was not about a legal strategy. This was about my life, my name, my 30 years of history that had just been so publicly and so brutally rewritten. I had been silent for too long. I had listened to his lies. I had endured the pity of my friends. I had suffered the betrayal of my children. My silence was over. I placed a hand on Eleanor's arm, a small, gentle pressure that stopped her from rising. She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Let me do this. She understood immediately. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She settled back into her chair. Then, I stood up. The simple act of rising to my feet in the middle of the courtroom was a profound and dramatic disruption of the established order. All eyes, which had been on the lawyers and the judge, snapped to me. The room, which had been filled with the low hum of legal proceedings, fell completely and utterly silent. I saw the shock on Robert's face, the flash of annoyance on his lawyer's. I saw my children in the back row, their heads snapping up, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. I saw the judge, her eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch in surprise. I was not supposed to speak. The old crazy and broke wife was supposed to sit quietly and let the professionals decide her fate. I did not have a speech prepared. I did not have a legal argument. I had only a single elegant folder in my hand, the one Eleanor had prepared for me that morning. And I had the truth. The turning point had arrived. And it was not going to be a lawyer's argument. It was going to be a quiet, personal, and long overdue statement of fact delivered by me. I stood in the silent courtroom, the weight of every gaze in the room a physical pressure. I did not look at Robert. I did not look at my children. I addressed myself only to the bench, to the one person in the room whose opinion truly mattered. Your Honor, I began, and my voice, to my own profound relief, was calm, clear, and steady. It held no trace of the hysteria Robert had so carefully fabricated. It was the voice of a competent, rational woman. My name is Vivian Sterling, and I apologize for the procedural interruption, but there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding regarding the ownership of the property at 45 Rosewood Lane. I used the formal address, the legal designation, not the sentimental family home that Robert's lawyer had so emotionally invoked. This was a matter of property, not sentiment. Robert's lawyer, Arthur Vance, started to rise, a protest already forming on his lips. Your Honor, I object. My client's wife is not a legal counsel. Judge Esposito held up a hand, silencing him with a single sharp gesture. I will allow it, Mr. Vance, she said, her eyes fixed on me, a flicker of genuine curiosity in their depths. Mrs. Sterling, you may proceed, briefly. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. Mr. Vance has built a very compelling and entirely fictional narrative this morning. He has petitioned the court to grant his client an asset that does not and has never belonged to him. I am not here to argue. I am simply here to present a single irrefutable fact. I did not present bank statements. I did not present tax records. I did not present a counter-argument to Robert's claims of my instability. To do so would be to engage with his lies, to give them a legitimacy they did not deserve. Instead, I opened the elegant dark blue folder I was holding. Inside was a single folded, slightly yellowed document. It was the original title deed, the one I had retrieved from the safe deposit box, now carefully preserved in an archival sleeve. I took it out. The old heavy paper with its watermarks and its 30 years of history felt solid and real in my hand. It was a tangible piece of the past, an artifact, and as an antiques appraiser I knew the power of an original artifact to silence all speculation. Your Honor, I said, my voice resonating with a quiet, unshakable confidence, I would like to submit into evidence the original, hand-signed title deed for the property in question, as executed on May 10th. I held the document aloft for a moment, letting the entire courtroom see it, letting them see this ghost from the past that was about to change the entire future. Then I walked forward and handed the folder to the bailiff. Please give this to the judge, I said. The bailiff, a large, impassive man, took the folder and walked it up to the bench. Every eye in the room followed its short journey. The fate of my home, of my life, was contained in that single elegant folder. The presentation was complete. The evidence had been submitted. All that was left was the reading of the verdict. Judge Esposito took the folder from the bailiff. She opened it and removed the archival sleeve containing the deed. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the faint, crisp rustle of the old paper as she unfolded it. She put on her reading glasses and began to read, her expression a mask of professional neutrality. Robert watched her, a confident, indulgent smile on his face. He clearly believed this was some desperate, pathetic last-ditch effort, a meaningless piece of old paper that would prove nothing. Sasha, beside him, whispered something in his ear, and he chuckled softly. The judge read the document once, her eyes scanning the legal text. Then she read it again, more slowly this time, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up from the paper, her gaze no longer neutral. It was sharp, focused, and deeply, deeply annoyed. She looked over her glasses, not at me but at Robert's lawyer, Arthur Vance. Counsel, the judge said, and her voice was dangerously quiet, a low, controlled tone that was far more intimidating than any shout could have ever been. Can you explain to me why you have wasted this court's valuable time this morning? for nearly 2 hours petitioning for the ownership of an asset that does not belong to your client. Vance stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. Your Honor, I don't understand. The property is the primary marital asset. Is it? The judge interrupted, her voice dripping with icy sarcasm. Because the legal document in my hand, the original incontrovertible title deed, seems to tell a very different story. A story which a simple 5-minute online title search, the most basic form of due diligence, would have confirmed for you weeks ago. She held up the deed, the yellowed paper a stark contrast to the dark wood of her bench. The original title deed for the property at 45 Rosewood Lane, dated May 10, 1995, lists one owner, and one owner only. She paused, looking directly at Robert, whose confident smile had now completely vanished, replaced by a mask of rigid, uncomprehending shock. The name on it, the judge declared, her voice ringing with the final, absolute authority of the law, is Vivian Dubois. It has never been amended. It has never been transferred. This house is, and always has been, her sole and separate property. She dropped the paper onto her desk. The small rustling sound was like a gunshot in the dead silent room. The reveal was complete. The anchor had been dropped. And it had just torn a gaping, irreparable hole in the hull of Robert's entire case. The silence that followed the judge's pronouncement was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, profound, and deeply satisfying silence, filled with the sound of a 30-year lie finally and publicly collapsing under its own weight. I watched Robert's face. The confident, arrogant smirk he had worn all morning did not just fade, it died. It was as if a switch had been flipped, cutting off the power to his entire performance. His jaw went slack, the healthy, confident color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly gray. His eyes, which had been so full of dismissive pity for me, were now wide with a wild, panicked disbelief. It was the face of a man who had not just lost a point in a legal argument, but had just watched his entire carefully constructed reality detonate before his eyes. He looked at Sasha. Her hand, which had been resting so possessively on his thigh, had slipped away. She was staring at him, her beautiful, perfectly made-up face, a mask of cold, hard calculation. She was not looking at the man she loved. She was looking at a bad investment, at a stock that had just been revealed to be worthless. He looked at his lawyer. Arthur Vance was shuffling his papers, his face a deep, humiliated crimson. He would not meet his client's eyes. He was a general whose entire army had just been revealed to be made of cardboard. And finally Robert looked at me. His eyes were filled with a raw, impotent fury, and something else, a dawning, terrible understanding. He was finally seeing me, not as the old, crazy and broke wife, but as the architect of his complete and utter ruin. He was seeing the woman who had quietly, patiently, and brilliantly outmaneuvered him. My children, in the back row, were statues of shock. Their mouths were literally agape. They were staring at me as if they had never seen me before, and, in a way, they hadn't. They had only ever seen the mother, the quiet, supportive figure in the background of their father's grand life. They had never seen Vivian Dubois, the sharp, successful businesswoman who had bought her own house with her own money. The silence stretched on, a beautiful, terrible, and deeply satisfying thing. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of a truth, long buried, finally rising to the surface. It was louder, more profound, and infinitely more triumphant than any cheer could have ever been. I had won, and I hadn't had to raise my voice. I had simply presented a single undeniable fact, and let the silence do the rest. Judge Esposito, having delivered the fatal blow, showed no signs of sympathy. She looked down at Robert's lawyer with an expression of profound judicial annoyance. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice like chipping ice, "given that the central pillar of your client's petition has just been revealed to be a complete and utter fabrication, this court is now inclined to view the rest of his claims with a significant degree of skepticism." The collapse was swift and brutal. Robert's entire case, which had been so carefully constructed around the foundation of seizing the house, crumbled into dust. The judge, now viewing him not as a concerned husband but as a manipulative, dishonest actor who had knowingly wasted the court's time, became a swift and merciless instrument of financial justice. She took up the matter of my business. "Given Mr. Sterling's demonstrable lack of knowledge regarding the family's primary assets," she said with withering sarcasm, "this court finds his claim of having provided strategic advisement to Mrs. Sterling's highly successful and specialized firm to be entirely without credibility." She dismissed his claim to a 50% share, awarding him only a small legally mandated portion of the increase in its value during the marriage, a fraction of what he had demanded. Next, she addressed his petition for spousal support. She looked at the financial disclosures, at my income versus his. Mr. Sterling is an able-bodied man with a significant income of his own, she declared. His desire to maintain the standard of living he enjoyed during the marriage appears to have been based on his access to his wife's assets, not his own. The petition for spousal support is denied. One by one, his audacious demands were dismantled, his claims dismissed. The judge moved through the remaining assets with a ruthless efficiency, her rulings consistently and decisively in my favor. She was not just dividing our assets, she was sending a clear, unmistakable message. She was punishing him for his lies. With every ruling, I watched Robert shrink a little more in his chair. The confident, powerful man who had walked into the courtroom that morning was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling, and utterly defeated shell. His kingdom had not just been conquered, it had been dismantled, brick by brick, right before his eyes. He had walked in expecting to take everything. He was walking out with almost nothing. When the hearing finally adjourned, the hallway outside the courtroom was a scene of quiet, devastating carnage. Robert was in a furious, whispered argument with his lawyer, his face a mask of mottled rage. "You're fired," I heard him hiss. "You're all fired." Sasha, her dream of a luxurious inherited life having evaporated, did not wait for the argument to conclude. She gave Robert a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. A look that said, "You are not the man I thought you were." Then, without a single word, she turned on her stiletto heel and walked away, her brisk, angry footsteps echoing down the marble hall. She didn't look back. I walked past them all, my head held high, Eleanor Vance at my side. My children Marcus and Jenna rushed to intercept me, their faces a wreck of shock, guilt, and a dawning desperate understanding of the new world order. "Mom," Marcus began, his voice a pleading stammer. We didn't know," Dad said. "We're so sorry." "We should have stood up for you," Jenna whispered, her eyes filled with tears. I stopped and looked at them, at my beautiful, weak, and now deeply regretful children. I felt not anger, but a deep, profound sadness. "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You should have." I did not offer them forgiveness. I did not offer them comfort. I simply looked at them with a calm, sad finality, and then I kept walking. I left them standing there, in the middle of the hallway, in the wreckage their father had created, and which they had so spinelessly enabled. Perhaps one day we would find our way back to each other, but not today. Today was for me. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, clean afternoon sun. I had lost my family. At least for now. I had lost 30 years of a life I had thought was real. But I had reclaimed something far more important. I had reclaimed my name. I had reclaimed my home. And I had reclaimed my life. I was no longer Vivian Sterling, the old, crazy, and broke wife. I was Vivian Dubois, and I was the sole and separate owner of my own future.